are high, and that's relatively new in Denmark. We have different forms of families, a lot of people living alone. So many of the traditions, the common shared cultural narratives are actually gone. We don't have them anymore. Maybe Jesper and I can agree on something, but if we talk to someone else, they live differently. And then we have a lack of trust in the politicians. Normally Denmark is that's called the Danish miracle, because we had a great trust in our politicians. Compared to Southern Europe, we still have it, but it's decreasing. And also in authorities, the trust in authorities are decreasing. It's still relatively high compared to Southern Europe, because we have a little, very low corruption. But we have a movement there that it's called, but it's actually also global, that the trust in politicians are decreasing. So we have less binding us together.
Less social bonds. Yeah. Which is a problem, because social work is all about producing social bonds in society. So when these changes happen, they affect the number of social bonds, and you have to construct them again through social work in new ways.
So the main theory, which is mainly borrowed from Ove Kaj Pedersen, Professor Ove Kaj Pedersen's work, he has this model where he historically defined three kinds of states. First, the national state, which in Denmark approximately had its glory days between 1850 and 1950. That was also the period where we laid the ground for the famous welfare state. But in the national state, the subject is individual. Its pedagogy and cultural thinking is based on the Enlightenment, that a person must be built up. I use the German word Bildung. It has no proper English phrase, actually. So in conferences, we also use the German word Bildung. The person has to be taught to read and write and learn about art, about culture, about history, everything, and make its own decision, and by itself accept that it has to live among other people. And in Denmark, the national state is not something evil, because about that time we had lost so many wars that the nationalism in Denmark were more connected to being together, not opposing others, because we could not win over anybody. So that the great idea was to build on how could we live together. We made many progresses building great dams to get more farmland, and we had some very famous movements, like farmers building
cooperative systems, big cooperative organizations.
So we had this wave of solidarity, and then we had some great political agreements on how to take care of each other in Denmark. Yeah, there was volunteer, a cultural movement, and that's quite different than south of our border in Germany. They did some different things, but in Denmark it was the main course. And this movement led to the welfare state. That's very common in Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, where we had this cultural, well-defined areas where we took care of each other. And the great Chinese leader under the communist regime, Deng Xiaoping, was once asked what kind of state would he dream of China developing into, and he replied, Denmark. That's the perfect communist system. But it was a liberal democracy who actually had implied what a communist would say what was the dream society. And that's, of course, not the whole truth, but there were also great problems with the welfare state. But the idea was democracy, that everyone should have the right and the possibility to participate and joining in making their own laws. And that was also the people with handicaps or low social status. We had lots of programs focusing on getting them to participate in the democracy. We had libraries everywhere. In small cities, we had libraries where people could read papers and books and everything. Very expensive programs for learning people who didn't learn to read in school, to read as adults. And all the legislations were made on, for blind people with, you know, this dots they read on. To the extreme, we used millions and millions of Danish kroner to make people participate in the democracy, no matter what their initial possibilities were. And about in the 80s and about 1990, we were beginning to realize that that could not keep on using that amount of money. There was actually a political consensus that this is too expensive. And when we no longer can protect our industries, as I explained with the ship example, we had to do something else. And from America, from the Clinton administration actually, we borrowed this idea of how to make our policy. And the idea is the competitive state where the person not has to be respected in his own right, but the person is actually someone who can be profitable for the state. And that's what we measure on. How many people can we put through an educational system and make sure that they reach the adult age and get an education and pay taxes. And that's for the social work in Denmark. That is the main objective. Can we move people from a passive state to an active state where they work and pay taxes? And we have many reforms concerning actually this subject. You can feel that we are in the funny part now, and soon lunch. So keep on. The tool for doing this is competence-based learning. How can we teach teachers and social workers to produce the maximum when they reach out in the practice?
And also produce a maximum profitability
yes.
in the users.
Yeah. And the social frame, early on, we had the nation, we all speak Danish, and we all loved frikadeller. You haven't tried frikadeller, I know you have to try it. That's a Danish dish. Meatballs, a special kind of meatballs. In the national state, and in the welfare state, we had democracy. We are all adults, and we all make our own laws, and that's why we had to apply to them. But in the competitive state, it's different. That's a cohesiveness. Cohesiveness.
Cohesiveness. I think.
Yeah. Cohesiveness. And and in the sense that we are all working together. You participate in the society when you have a job. And when today in the Danish debate, politicians actually use that frame. We had to also people who are ill. We have a special legislation, but people who are sick, injured, that how can they go to job? We make special technical solutions so they can go to job anyway. Because when you are having a job, you are a part of the society. That's different, because early on you were a part of the society because you were a part of our tribe. No matter if you were handicapped or whatever, you were a part of this society. Today you are part of the society when you are working. And the goal for the social work, also for the educational system, is to provide access to this work life. And some changes that we use in Denmark to do this, because this idea of the focus on competence and work has met a lot of resistance from people like Jesper and I, because we traditionally think otherwise, that it was the idea of the people's right to exist and everything else that was important. But the way of implementing these changes is to make constant changes in administration and practice. We have reforms, some kind of reform every year. Isn't that right? Yeah. Something is changing. We don't have any routines anymore, actually. We have agreements and we have policies and we have papers, but we don't have routines. And that's a good thing in many ways, because early on we had many bad routines. When I started as a teacher a long time ago, we had meetings, and then sometimes the agenda was 20 years old. We were discussing something, and an agenda that was 20 years old, because we have used the same agenda every year. So you cannot just make a law and make things happen. You have to be more strategic in your management, and that's why we are changing and changing and changing everything all the time. You see here, this building is made for this kind of change. You can use it to many other educations. This room is, you cannot see what kind of education is going on in here. You cannot see it. The walls are white. So that's why we have to change. We have to be dynamic all the time.
Even if we put up a poster or something, or just a piece of paper, they will tell us to put it down immediately, because it has to be used, changeable. And I mean, we can't have our books anywhere. We can't have anything anywhere, because other people might come in and have to rent the room or blah blah blah. So changing.
There was actually a question about why the building looks like this. And I know there is some kind of brochure about it, but I've never read it.
But the reason is this, that it's dangerous for, if you want to do these changes and you want to solve these problems that I mentioned about how can we make the society economically sustainable, you have to make some changes. And the greatest danger, especially some Swedish scientists has researched in these kind of political reforms, the greatest danger for political reform is actually the old ways of doing things in a profession. So that is the main objective you have to fight. You have to fight these bad habits in the professions. Like me, when I was a young teacher.
This building is actually dissolving the idea of professions, because it's putting 5 professions together. We can't see who is teaching nursing, who is teaching pedagogy, who is teaching. I don't have an identity with a group of people, not really, that teaches BA in, say, social work. Because I don't know who they are. There are many of them, and we're all over the house, and we're mixed up.
And then you get more adaptable. You don't gonna sit with a 20-year-old agenda and discussing things anymore, because things are changing.
When you have a house like that, when you don't have the opportunity to sit down with your colleagues and say, no, we are not going to accept a 20% less, more work, save money. We can't, because I mean, even the building sort of makes it difficult for us to have a union, because they are splitting us up as professions. Because they want to be able to do reforms quicker, they want to be able to cut quicker. We cannot group. No, exactly. We cannot group, not for too long.
And what we're going to discuss after we have been having some lunch is how to react on this. And I'm really interested in hearing what you're thinking, because in Denmark we are discussing this, and this research that I have presented for you. Theoretical frame, at least, is quite new, and we are not sure completely what is happening. But I've been participating in a lot of international conferences, and this was debated also globally. What is actually happening, and what should we do? Do we need these professions with tradition, or should we accept this constant change? The other interesting phenomenon in Denmark is that we had to be positive about it. In the educational system, we have many cases where people actually have been fired because they raised critique. Jesper said you have to be critical. That's a very Danish way of thinking, North European way of thinking, that you have to be critical to the state. But it can have consequences today. That's also a very new experience in Denmark. Normally you can say anything. If you write something in the paper, say my boss is an idiot, and nothing happened. But don't do it today in Denmark. You have to be aware that it can have consequences. Because you have to be positive, we have to be constructive. And if you are positive and constructive, you will get a better position. Maybe you can be professor. We also have to use evidence-based policy, and in the field of social work and in social sciences, pedagogy, evidence is, I'm sorry to say, but evidence is not possible. Even in physics, evidence is not possible. When I speak to people who work with the natural sciences, they laugh at us when we talk about evidence, because it is not possible.
It has to be said that you're saying that from a philosopher's point of view, because you're.
I'm saying that from a scientific point of view.
Yeah.
Just to be sure, every scientist knows that evidence is not written in rock or anything, but it is the assumption that someone in the academic field of something can agree on right now. That is the best answer we have so far. That's the definition of evidence, where it comes from. Also in medical science, is the best answer we have so far. Tomorrow maybe we have some better evidence. But when we use it in policy,
changes in the sciences.
Yes, exactly. But when we use it in policy, and when the politicians interfere with the professions, they say we have to do what is working. And many people think, that's a good idea to do what is working. Really good. But it's also, they do what they think is working, and that's a great difference. Because if I disagree on the politicians who say, I have this study to show that this is working, and I come and say, no, I think it's a bad idea to do this, then people think I'm an idiot. Why do? But maybe I have an idea of something that is working better. Maybe.
So evidence in itself might be all right, but when you combine policy and evidence, then you get into trouble. Is that your point?
Yes, because then you also disconnect the academic dialogue. When in the field of medicine, when you're discussing how can we cure cancer, you have a dialogue, and then you have also in any given period you have some evidence about this is working and this is not working. But there is continuous dialogue, a critique between professionals. And if a politician is going to say, I will support this kind of research with a lot of money and I will disapprove this research, we have a problem concerning the actual subject of curing cancer.
But it is ethical question. It is question of ethic and values.
Yeah.
Not only about it's a policy, so we can have an ethic policy also, and evidence-based.
Based on the same evidence.
Yeah, you can easily use evidence in policy, but you have to first accept that the scientific quality is dependent on critique and some people who disagree.
Of course.
You have to support this disagreement. But when you demand a positive agenda in a place like this, you disable the agreement. So that is the great challenge we have right now. How can we make sure that we have a disagreement? We also often discuss it here. How can we disagree? We have some big programs who makes a lot of money. The schools are buying programs, or other institutions are buying programs from us. And then we put a lot of people into these programs who are working on it. We make a lot of money. Hey, it's great. But we sometimes discuss, how can we make sure to disagree on something? Because we all have to be positive about these programs. It's going well, and we're all happy because we can keep our jobs and everything. But how can we make sure that we remember to disagree on something, so that evidence actually became what it should be, the best answer we have so far. But now it's time for lunch.
Yeah, and just to sum up a little bit. the connection to social work here would be, in your opinion, to me, it looks like I would like to sum up on the connection to social work, just to leave everybody with a small. Yeah. Well, one of the things is that I forgot the word again.
But I can try and sum up because from all the fields of social science and social work, the point is that we are viewing people as some, not actually subject, but objects for the state. And the political demand in Denmark is, how can we provide evidence of what to do? And what to do is defined by the politicians. We had to make, they actually said percentages on it in our system, that 97% of the child population has to go in normal schools and perform normally. And 95 or 90, I can't remember, but a certain percentage have to go through a gymnasium, and all of if we can do it, then also have a job and pay taxes. We have some very quantitative goals provided by politicians, and then we have the social system, who has to make sure that if someone falls out, that they'll quickly get back into job. They don't have to be happy or anything, or democratic participants. They don't care, actually. That's not the focus anymore. If you ask a politician, they will say, yeah, they have to be happy. But that's not the focus. The focus is work. How can we get them to work as fast as possible? Even though they're sick or they have mental illness or anything, we have to get them to work. And I'm not completely negative, because we have some wonderful programs right now with people with mental disability, with an IQ under 70. What's it called in English?
Imbeciles, maybe.
Yeah, but we have some wonderful programs. In the old days, for 100 years ago, we moved them to islands. We have many islands in Denmark. We moved them to an island, and then they could rot there and get some food and everything. But they could stay there. Today, we have some wonderful programs where we put them into jobs. We have a great chain called IKEA, who is with some financial support, hires them, and they go and clean and do things. That's, in many ways, it's great because they love it. They like going out and have colleagues and doing things and eating lunch and everything, and that's, of course, that's fine. But that's the kind of thing that we really focus on. How can we get people to work? And there are good things and there are bad things about it, because the risk is, of course, that we can overlook that people are individuals, have their own dreams and own lives and own priorities. But in our programs, we make the priorities for them, and that is to work. So that's a great change in the Northern European way of thinking. And it's actually also, that's why I want to connect it to Serbia, very clear in the EU and OECD, our economic cooperation in Europe, that is the way things are going.
So the message is to people from Serbia, this is coming. Either you have it already, or it's going to come your way.
We have it, but we want to get
You
it.
have had a lot of it, maybe. I don't know. But after we eat, I want to discuss. I have some questions for you that we can discuss after lunch, because I'm not saying that everything is actually such and so, because we are not finished thinking about this, researching in it, because it is brand new in an academic sense. But the change is huge.
But let me sum up a little bit. There is less room for professional autonomy, because the politicians go in and decide. When that's the case, then we have to be extra attentive to the fact that we still keep up our ability to be critical of the state. And we also have to be aware that there is a dehumanizing effect of this. We are looked at
there's a risk of it.
As competition soldiers rather than human beings.
There's a risk of that.
Would that be fair?
There's a risk of that.
Okay.
It's too narrow to say that it's inevitable consequence. But there's a risk of it. We have to be aware of how we look on the human in this idea.
Okay, great. Would that be?
Yeah, that would be the case.
Great, thank you. Just before we go to lunch, a few practical details. We have lunch now, from now and until 1 o'clock, and we'll gather here in this room. 1 o'clock.